Yo, people and patrons of the night, it is your boy BD, and I'm the host of the Horror Tavern. This is a one-stop shop for all things horror, so make sure you take a seat and you grab a drink, because I'm going to be reviewing my very first Clive Barker horror story, which is long overdue, because Clive Barker is an absolute titan when it comes to the horror genre. He's had some of his stuff adapted, he's had a lot of famous books, such as I think The Hellbound Heart, which got turned into the Hellraiser movie. So very famous guy, well established, but I've never checked out anything that he's done. So this is going to be my very first review of his work. And it was quite the effective one. This is a really good, in fact, I would say great short story that I think all of you guys should check out if you get your hands on it. So without further ado, let's get into the review. I'll cover a little bit of the plot and then go into my exact thoughts. And by the way, happy 4th of July. We live in America, got a lot of freedom of speech, freedom of choice, a lot of great ways to be successful and just overall enjoy the benefits of the country. So make sure you're celebrating with all your friends and loved ones, you're having some good drinks, having some good food, maybe some barbecue, and yeah, just have a fun time today. And most importantly, enjoy this review. So this short story basically comes from one of his famous short story collections, which is actually a series of books called The Books of Blood. The Books of Blood are several short story collection books that he has that have I think 3, 4, 5, usually 4 to 5 short stories in each of them. So they're not super long. They're pretty condensed, but he has a series of them that add up. And they pretty much all have extreme horror involved in the stories. You know, they're all pretty metal. They got some wild ideas. They got some violent gore. I would pretty much say that he's got some pretty metal stories. The stories that he writes are pretty metal. So if you're not into extreme horror, you might not be, a fan of this, especially if you're squeamish of gore and weird descriptions and violent descriptions. This would be a hard book for you to read. But if you like that stuff, I'd recommend checking out Clive Barker, because the stuff that I've read so far is pretty fucking brutal. So the Book of Blood opens up basically with a wraparound story, an opening that explains that there's these people in this haunted house, and basically this haunted house is able to become a medium to let in the people, the undead, ghost, paranormal activity, as well as basically be a portal open to hell. And during this haunted house encounter, essentially there's some poltergeist activity that goes on where the house basically starts getting possessed, the doors start shaking, there's bright heat emanating from the doors, people start having their faces melted off, and a dude gets, levitated into the air as there's all these wretched souls, these ghosts belonging to serial killers and people violently murdered and just people bound and damned to hell, who managed to come through the highway to hell into the real world. And they all start basically shattering glass and then carving their own stories and writing within the body of this individual. So this individual has millions of words carved into his flesh, and he's bleeding all over. His face is carved up, his body's carved up, genitals are carved up, everything gets ripped up. And the woman who's left behind in this house, who may or may not have had a part in summoning this paranormal activity, basically starts reading off all the writing and stories that are on this guy's body. And that's what leads to these stories that are in the book. So the first story, which is the one getting covered in this video, is called The Midnight Meat Train. Pause on that title, double pause. But The Midnight Meat Train is a story about a man named Kaufman. Kaufman is a guy who, in his youth, basically idolized New York. He loved the city of New York. He always wanted to go there, visit, and live there. And then when he ended up actually moving there and has stayed there for several months now in New York City, he realizes how much of a shithole it is. It's extremely noisy. It's extremely dirty. Unbelievably crowded, unbelievably loud. So the city that he once basically glorified and worshipped, he pretty much spites now, which is kind of how I felt the first time I went to Los Angeles. Los Angeles was a city that obviously all of us have probably heard a lot of hype of if you've never been there. And I went there, and after spending a week there, that place is one of the shittiest cities I've ever been to. And I've traveled a lot, even to international parts of the world. London, Paris, Dubai, you name it. And that was it's one of the worst cities I've ever been to. It's worse than New York. So even though New York is getting shit on in this short story, I've been to New York, and it's better than Los Angeles. Sorry to anybody who lives in Los Angeles, but it's the truth. I mean, I've asked other people who've been to Los Angeles who are from where I live and just in my state and other states, and even friends that I know have been there have all said that it's a shitty city. So it is what it is. But New York is getting slandered in this one. The Bronx. And Kaufman is basically your typical, like, office worker. He works the mid to evening shift, basically comes home super, super late. He's not married. He's got no kids, basically lives alone with himself in an apartment. And he basically is at a bar, just sort of relaxing before he heads off to work, or maybe it might be his day off, I forgot. And there's this story that's circulating on the newspapers that's basically being broadcast, which is quite horrific. And that's that inside of the New York subway trains, there are dead bodies being found within the train carts, but it's not normal. These are very meticulous and strange. These bodies that are being found within the New York subway train carts are basically hung from the little straps that you grip onto in the train. If you've ever been on a public train, they got the straps. Their feet are hung onto the straps, so the body is upside down, just hanging. And they are completely naked, and they are shaved naked. They have no hair on their genitals, they have no hair on their head, no hair on their arms, their chest, their legs. Men and women alike are all completely shaved meticulously, and all their necks are slit, and the backs of their bodies are basically ripped and torn open. And the muscle is exposed and the arteries, and these people are gutted the same way that a butcher would work on a piece of meat. So these people are basically hung upside down, stripped naked, and basically butchered and ripped up and shredded the same way that meat would be done in a butcher shop. So yeah, this is quite horrific murders that are taking place on these trains. And again, the bodies are being found. It's not just one body. There was one case of a woman that was found in that way, and it pretty much shocked a bunch of people. And next thing you know, 3 bodies are found on the next time. So this killer is rampaging around. There's a serial killer just committing these brutal murders down in the subway trains, and nobody's able to catch and find out who it is. And this is particularly alarming to Kaufman because he thinks that the way that they're written is, like, the way that these crimes are done is so grotesque, so disgusting, so strange. It seems like the work of a professional with how meticulous and cult-like it is. And of course, everybody in New York pretty much uses the subway trains, despite how dangerous they are, even outside of this serial killings basically going on. And even Kaufman himself says, if you live in New York for a long period of time, you will pretty much know of somebody who gets murdered. There's so much crime in the city. There's so many bodies found. There's so much, criminal activity going on, drug dealing, murders, and all this stuff, that it's typical for New York, but this is even extreme. This is really, really strange, and it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But as he's at this bar, there's a gentleman next to him who's kind of an older guy, and he's kind of like a conspiracy theorist dude. He thinks that this might be some type of government plant, that they're hiding something, that they might be making clones or some shit, and there might be a monster roaming around in the subway station that's killing all these people. And of course, Kaufman just thinks he's your typical New York loony, doesn't take him very seriously. And then you cut to the perspective of a man named Mahogany. And Mahogany seems like your typical office worker as well. He dresses up in a suit, he puts on cologne, cleans himself pretty well. But you find out that Mahogany is actually the serial killer. Yeah, you get 2 perspectives in this short story. You get the perspective of Kaufman, the main character, and then you get the perspective of Mahogany, the serial killer. And you find out how meticulous he is when it comes to these killings. He's very much a professional assassin. He's like a hitman. If you ever played the Hitman video games, this dude's as meticulous as that guy. He's very precise with the way he kills people. He takes a lot of pride in these serial killings that he's doing, and he treats it like a job. He treats it like a divine job that he's the only chosen one to do. And he even dresses up and brings around, bags and stuff as if he's off to work, but his work is murder. So he's a pretty serious, pretty professional killer. And what ends up happening is that at one point, Kaufman ends up leaving late in the evening one day at work and has to go on a train, and just so happens that a few other people are on there with him, and well, let's just say Mahogany is also on the train. He's in the subway station and he's scouting out for some victims, and he just so happens to end up on the same late evening, late night train that the main character is on. And as the main character is basically nodding off and feeling sleepy, he basically keeps dozing off until one day one moment he basically wakes up, and he ends up realizing that the black person that was sitting in the car with them and the freckly white guy that's in the car with them are essentially missing, that they left, and he thinks maybe they got off their stop or something. But then he notices that the train starts, kind of slowing down and acting weird, and he notices that there's some noises and some weird smell going on in the cart next to him. And when he walks over there, he sees a basically puddle of blood seeping through the little door crack in the connecting doors to the other cart. And he realizes that there's a curtain put over there. And when he manages to find a hole and look through the curtain while keeping quiet, he sees Mahogany carving up some bodies in the same way that I described in the beginning of this video. Feet hanging from the straps, them getting torn apart like butcher's work, and he basically becomes nauseous. He collapses, he hides under his seat, all while Mahogany basically goes into the next cart that he's in, and he doesn't happen to find the guy because the guy's tucked under the seats. He walks towards where the driver is, and Kaufman thinks that this guy is going to kill the driver. And plot twist, you find out that the driver of this train, the conductor, and Mahogany might be in on this murders together. They might be working together, and that effectively means the main character is fucked. You are fucked, dude, because the people around you have been slaughtered and killed. You're hiding under the seat, cowering, and turns out that the conductor of the train, the one driving, and this man are all working in a partnership. And essentially he has to find his way to get out, maybe to stop the killers, stop the conductor, and see what he can do. And it's dangerous because you get some hints that Kaufman explains that it doesn't matter if the police even happen to catch him, because as soon as he would go into basically court and meet the judge, he would be bailed out and a free man, that the law cannot touch him. So you start to suspect, is he a government contracted killer? If so, what's the point of what's going on? Is there like some government experiments going on? Are they targeting specific people? Is this like a rogue clone or something? You think it might be some like CIA Black Ops shit. It turns out he was right, that the law cannot touch him, that he would be a free man, but it's not necessarily government related. There might be more than meets the eye going on in this train, and let's just say that old boy should have stuck to taking the green line, because you do not want to be trapped within the midnight meat train, because the things that happen on this train and the destination that the train goes to is horrific. And when I mean you get to the climax of the story, it goes from 50 to 100. It turns up into a much scarier, much grander scale thing. Maybe, maybe not. You get some otherworldly threats, some secret society stuff, some lore reveal about New York City itself and what might be going on. And yeah, the main character, Kaufman, definitely bit off more than he can chew. And that's essentially the short story, without me giving too much away in terms of where it leads to. This is a great short story. It has a lot of tension in it, especially when you actually get into the midnight meat train situation. There is so much tension involving Kaufman trying to avoid making any noise, trying to find a way to escape. The idea of people being killed and murdered, and the homicides being, police finding bodies hanging from their feet on train straps and basically being gutted like fish and fresh meat at a butcher's place is crazy. The descriptions of what Mahogany does and how meticulous it is, and some of the things that Kaufman unfortunately has to see in this train, are very horrific. I like the idea of having the dual perspective of Mahogany and Kaufman, the main character, so you get the villain perspective and the main character perspective in one story. Kind of reminds me of a Stephen King short story from his Night Shift collection, which is Hands down one of my favorite short story collections, one of my favorite horror books of all time. There's a story in there called The Man Who Loved Flowers, I believe, which does have a double perspective thing, I think, going on in that story as well. So this is much better than The Man Who Loved Flowers. That's a pretty good story. This one's a great story. There's a lot of stuff going on. You think that the story is going in one direction, and then you start to suspect that there might be something more going on. There's enough context clues that you realize there might be more than meets the eye with the story because of the way Mahogany talks about how he was chosen to do this job, and he specifically refers to doing this for the fathers. That's what he says. He says he does this serial killing and stuff early on for the fathers, who are his bosses. And you're like, wait, the serial killer is working for somebody, calls them the fathers? Is that like code for some government thing? And it's like, what's going on? And when you eventually get to the destination that the midnight meat train gets to, it is much more horrific. It is on some, best way I can describe it, Bloodborne shit. If you've ever played the Bloodborne video game, it's on some Bloodborne shit, some next level stuff, some commentary on potentially secret societies, Illuminati, stuff like that. I'm trying not to give too much away. I want you to at least try to understand. It's going to be way crazier than you think it is from what I'm saying. So I'm trying to keep it a little bit vague. And the scale of what the story takes place in, involving maybe certain people being chosen, rituals, the way the world runs, it's all really, really crazy, but it's all metal and dark. Again, there's so much violence and gore in this story. It's disturbing, it's intense at certain points, and it gets actually genuinely scary and horrific after a certain part. But I loved it. I love how sick and twisted this story is. And 100% Clive Barker is a really good extreme horror writer. Like, he's extreme horror author and writer for it. He has really creative stories from what I've read so far. His descriptions, the weirdness to his stories is that good type of weird that you love. And yeah, I definitely recommend all you guys who love adult horror, who love extreme horror, check out Clive Barker's The Midnight Meat Train. You've probably already read this short story and maybe some of other Clive Barker's work. I know the short story was turned into a movie, which I heard was pretty good by Clive Barker fans on Reddit and stuff. So I would probably check that out. But yeah, go check out The Midnight Meat Train. I would give this short story a 9 out of 10. This is a great short story, and I suggest all of you guys give it a read if you're ready for some of the squeamish and crazy stuff in the Book of Blood one. And that's all I got for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Again, happy 4th of July, and in celebration of Independence Day or 4th of July, hit the subscribe button down below and hit that like button. It's a free way to support me, lets me know you guys are engaged with the content, and really does help build up the community and motivate me to keep making videos. So I really appreciate it if you help build up the community, and stay tuned for more content to come, and deuces. I can't get Katy Perry's fireworks song every time 4th of July starts. It's stuck with me. It haunts me like a poltergeist. But at the same time, it's a good song. I can't hate.